Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 12th May 2021. In this video, let us have a look at this couple of issues. This article is titled, Not All Crises Are Opportunities for Reforms. Let us understand what the present situation is all about and the structural reforms that our government has taken, the problems with those structural reforms that are discussed in this article. We have to understand basically that the situations in 1991 are not the same in 2021. The reason why we are picking this year is we had a balance of payments crisis in 1991, and to cover that up we have taken up LPG reforms, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization reforms. Basically we opened up our economy. In a monumental crisis like that of COVID, which is probably the worst crisis of independent India, we cannot answer the questions raised by this pandemic with just structural reforms in our economic structures and administrative structures. It goes much beyond that. We are talking about certain legacy issues. Today, how many of us would trust a hospital for attaining medical services in the times of COVID? Why are we running towards private hospitals only? That is the question we have to address fundamentally. So this brings us to the question about trust. Why we don't trust government institutions to deliver the services that we need in this crisis? Isn't it the biggest deficit we have in our democracy that we don't trust our institutions? Is it because we don't have the capacity? Is it because the systems are so overwhelmed with what is happening around them that they are not able to handle the crisis just like everywhere else in the world? We cannot exactly say that, because as far as health is concerned, even before the pandemic, the situation was more or less the same. So in this kind of a scenario, what would you expect from the government? Is it structural reforms or building capacities and the ability to garner that trust on the government? So the recent reforms taken up, are they in the direction of building this trust is the question that we have to ask. This article looks into the issues that this pandemic has exposed and why we cannot compare 1991 with 2021. Let us understand the common point that is there in both 1991 crisis and the 2021 crisis. 1991 crisis was all about economy. But if you take a look at the present times, this is hardly just about economy. It goes much beyond that. We are talking about social welfare, the ability to trust the governments. So this is more about a trust deficit in our governance mechanisms and also the unprecedented economic crisis in the last 3 decades. Given this scenario, we have to understand that just giving enough push for the industry will not be enough. So even if the government says that you are free to have no taxes at all because of the lockdowns imposed, the practical constraint is that no economic activity will happen. So given this situation, what are the steps needed? And also the second question that we have to ask is crisis always the trigger for any reform in our country? Unless and until a crisis occurs, don't we respond to our situations? And even in the present situation, if the reforms are actually seeing a shape, are they taking all the stakeholders involved into consideration while carrying out these reforms? These are the questions we have to address. Firstly, 1991 crisis had certain policy helps from elsewhere as well. For example, IMF actually helped India in designing the kind of economic policy that would trigger economic growth. So we just replicated that policy. But in 2021, the problem is across the world there is no template that would be foolproof to work, because we don't understand the crisis completely yet and it is continuously changing. What worked in 2020 is not working in 2021. In this crisis, what is the most apt response? If you look elsewhere in the developed world, it was stimulus. But in the present times, the government went for structural reforms through Atmanirbhar Bharat package. While this economic reforms are welcome and the government use this crisis to create these economic reforms, it was simply insufficient to develop the trust that we were talking about. Creating the trust will not come easily, but at least there should be signal that we are moving in that direction. In this monumental crisis, what we need today, according to the view of the author, is some sort of stimulus to keep the engine running, because we can't wait for this Atmanirbhar Bharat to take shape and re-employ all the people who are running out of livelihoods. According to a research, almost 75 million jobs would be lost in the next few months. So this would mean that there are a lot of hungry mouths to feed. We have a huge challenge in front of us, and most likely we need an overhaul of our rural employment programs. So this is the need of the hour. We are not talking about giving out universal basic income, but we are trying to restructure in such a way that the most vulnerable stakeholders have something to look forward to in this time of crisis going ahead. And in the longer run, we have to rebuild our governance structures in such a way that they can respond to any crisis at any moment. So this is an opportunity to learn, and at the same time, in the short term, we have to recognize that unless and until the vulnerable population, we are talking about as much as 75 million jobs, which is a huge thing. What constitutes a successful policy is the question that we have to understand here. Firstly, the design should comprehensively address every problem that is associated with this issue. That is the first step. Secondly, there should be certain political will. There should not be resistance from the opposition. Thirdly, there should be bureaucratic cooperation. That is, implementation should be friendly enough in such a way that bureaucracy is not overburdened. And finally, people should cooperate, and the will of people needs to be taken into consideration. In the present set of 2021 reforms, what is the need of the hour? People need money in their hands. And the Atmanirbhar policy was simply short of this particular aspect. So when the article says that the reforms have left out stakeholders, the policy did not comprehensively address the short-term problem of lack of money. Secondly, the policy did not take into consideration the burden of healthcare in our present situation. If we ask ourselves what is the COVID policy with respect to hospitalization across the country, do we have any policy? Why are the hospital charges so high in cities like Delhi, Mumbai and other metros? What is the logic behind it? Do we have a national level policy? We don't. Without addressing these short-term concerns which can literally push people into poverty, no amount of policy that will talk about future will see any success given the magnitude of this crisis right now. So we have to first focus on our short term, and any idea that alleviates the problem of money as well as the burden of healthcare in the short term should be welcome, and it should be debated. That is the gist of this article. How to adopt a child legally. This is about the issue of child adoption. In the pandemic, a lot of gullible people are being targeted by scammers because they are using orphan children to make money. So in the garb of few NGOs, a few people are reaching out to childless couples and suggesting that they should take up ownership of these orphans who were left alone because of the loss of their parents in the pandemic. But one has to understand, according to the Juvenile Justice Act, which created a legal mechanism for adoption of a child, has mandated that a structure called CARA should come into existence. This stands for Central Adoption Resource Authority. There should be an NOC given by this authority to the couple seeking to adopt a child, and when that NOC is obtained, the due process of law should be followed to adopt that child. It is a secular act, but people who want to adopt and practice the religion of Hinduism they should adapt under Hindu Adoption Act 1956. Legally, it is known as Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act 1956. But for every other purpose, Juvenile Justice Act is just about sufficient. Even children of relatives can also be adopted, because a few childless couples try to adopt their own relatives' kids so that they can take care of the children and continue their progeny. So representatives from CARA attend the couple and take up certain information to understand the reports. So they have to allow the couple to get registered on a system called Carings. This Caring stands for Child Adoption Resource Information and Guidance System. Sometimes we also have NRI couples. In that case, there is a convention called Hague Convention, which talks about inter-country adoption. In such a scenario, what the couple should do is, this CARA recognizes certain organizations abroad as one of the authorized organizations for ensuring adoption. In such a scenario, these NRIs should visit those centers and take up this adoption procedure. And in order to ensure that this entire process runs very smoothly, we require a public-private partnership in ensuring cooperation. So we need the help of all the wings of government. So we need help of police, we need help of officials, we need help of the media to reach out to the common public to make them aware of these issues. And we also have to take up the state legal services as well. And lastly, but most importantly, national and state commissions for protection of child rights. These institutions play the most significant role in coordinating efforts between various agencies of the government and ensure that children remain safe and sound in a very secure environment. That is the gist of this article. So the key takeaway for prelims, you have to understand what is UNCRC, that is UN Convention on Rights of Child. And then we have the Hague Convention on adoption between individuals of two countries, that is inter-country adoption. You have to know the definition of child as per Juvenile Justice Act, and you have to understand the legal basis for the authority that CARA derives. And similarly, you have to know what carings means. These are the preliminary pointers. So that's it for now. Thank you.